Utilities Commission. And with me this afternoon are Commissioners Clodfelter, Duffley, Hughes, and Kimmerite. I now call for hearing docket number E-2, sub 1311, which is in the matter of application of Duke Energy Progress, LLC, for the approval of a certificate of public convenience and necessity to construct a solar generating facility in Buncombe County, North Carolina. In compliance with the requirements of the State Government Ethics Act, I remind all members of the Commission of our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and inquire at this time as to whether any member of the Commission has a known conflict with respect to the matters coming before us in this docket. The record will reflect that no conflicts have been identified, so we will proceed. On January 23rd, 2023, Duke Energy Progress, or DEP, filed its application for approval of Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity to construct a solar generating facility in Buncombe County, North Carolina, along with a written direct testimony of Justin LaRoche. On February 2nd, 2023, the Commission issued an order scheduling hearing, establishing discovery guidelines, setting deadlines for parties to file testimony, and requiring DEP to provide public notice. The scheduling order scheduled a hearing to be held on Wednesday, April 5th, 2023 at 7:00 p.m. at the Buncombe County Courthouse in Asheville, North Carolina, for the purpose of receiving public witness testimony regarding DEP's application. The scheduling order also scheduled a hearing to be held today at this time and place for the purpose of receiving expert witness testimony on the application. On February 2nd, 2023, the Commission sent a letter to the State Environmental Review Clearinghouse providing notification of DEP's application. On March 14th, 2023, DEP filed the affidavit of publication for the public notice as was required by the scheduling order. On March 24th, 2023, the State Environmental Review Clearinghouse filed its comments on the application. On March 28th, 2023, DEP filed a motion to cancel the public witness hearing, which motion was granted by order of the Commission issued on March 29th. On April 26th, 2023, DEP filed supplemental information related to the application and requested that the supplemental information be incorporated with and considered part of the company's application. The participation in this proceeding by the public staff is recognized pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 62-15. On May 5th, 2023, the public staff filed the direct testimony of Jeff Thomas, which was corrected by filing made on May 9th. On May 15th, 2023, DEP filed the rebuttal testimony of Justin LaRoche. While no persons have sought to intervene in this proceeding, the Commission has received several consumer statements of position, which have been made part of the record of evidence. All right, I now call on counsel for the parties to make their appearances for the record, and we'll begin with DEP.
Chair Mitchell, Robert Kaler on behalf of Duke Energy Progress.
Chair Mitchell, Jason Higginbotham on behalf of Duke Energy Progress.
All right, good afternoon, gentlemen.
Ann Keyworth on behalf of the using and consuming public with the public staff.
All right, good afternoon, Ms. Keyworth. All right, before we begin, I note that Commissioners Brownbland and McKissick have joined the Commission. I also note that there is an outstanding motion to excuse witnesses, cancel this hearing, and admit evidence into the record. I will deny that motion as we are here today for the purpose of hearing from the witnesses and getting evidence admitted into the record. All right, any other preliminary matters before we get started?
Yes, Chair Mitchell. So the motion that you just referenced contained a itemization of exhibits and testimony that had been filed in the docket, and we would reiterate our request to move those into evidence at this time, waive cross-examination of the public staff's witnesses pursuant to an agreement that we have with public staff, and tender our witness available for commissioner questions.
All right, let's do this. At this point, would you please make a motion to move the company's evidence into application, beginning with the application and including the testimony of your witness, both the direct and rebuttal.
Yes.
I'll rule on the motion, then I'll ask you to do the same thing.
Yes, at this time, DEP moves to admit into evidence the application for a certificate of public convenience and necessity filed by Duke Energy Progress, along with the direct testimony of Justin LaRoche and attached exhibits, as well as the rebuttal testimony of Justin LaRoche.
All right, Mr. Higginbotham, that motion will be allowed. The supplemental information filed on April 26th.
Yes, as well as the supplemental information.
All right, I will allow into evidence the supplemental information the company filed in the docket on April 26th. All right, Ms. Keyworth.
Yeah, and Chair Mitchell, I would just note that in addition to the corrected filing on May 9th of public staff witness Jeff Thomas's testimony, we refiled that on May 16th with corrected pages. So
Okay, so as correct, so the testimony was filed on, the testimony corrections you referenced now were filed on May 16th.
they were initially filed May 9th and then refiled with attachments of the corrected pages on May 16th.
Okay, all right, well, the record will so reflect.
Thank you. And Chair Mitchell, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony as corrected of public staff witness Jeff Thomas be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
All right, that motion will be allowed. I note that Mr. Thomas's testimony includes confidential information, so I would ask Ms. Keyworth that you make sure that the transcript reflects that confidential information and is redacted as appropriate. I do not believe that any information in Duke's filing is confidential, but Mr. Higginbotham might ask that you do the same thing and ensure that the transcript reflects confidential information if any is included in the materials that have been admitted into evidence.
We will.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Have you all agreed upon an order of your witnesses?
Yes, we have. We can tender our witness first.
Okay, you may call your witness.
At this time, Duke Energy Progress calls Justin LaRoche.
All right, Mr. LaRoche, good afternoon.
Yeah.
Would you please raise your right hand, left hand on the Bible? You swear the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. All right, well, as we've already admitted your testimony, we will just go ahead and begin with questions from commissioners. Let me see if there are questions from commissioners. Commissioner Brown-Bland. Okay, Commissioner Kleinfelder. Commissioner Guthrie.
This is direct and rebuttal.
Direct and rebuttal. You want me to begin? I can.
Yeah.
Okay. 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 All right, I will begin with some questions for you, Mr. LaRoche. All right, and Mr. LaRoche, just so you are clear, your questions will cover your direct and your rebuttal testimony. So do you have both testimonies in front of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. All right, Mr. LaRoche, the public staff indicates in its testimony that the actual solar project was not able to take advantage of the interconnection process that you all have, for which you all have received approval for replacement generation. Can you help me understand why that's the case?
Sure. This project actually originated before the replacement generation process was implemented and approved, thus really not even needed.
Okay, so the interconnection studies for this project were completed before DEP had received approval to utilize the replacement.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So you use the serial queue process previously. Very similar outputs though. We're still using a point of interconnection at the existing facility. So it really just wasn't needed based on the timing when the project was originated.
Okay. Can you discuss the interconnection, the costs associated with interconnecting this particular solar generating facility to DEP's system?
I do not have a copy of the interconnection agreement or the facility studies in front of me, but essentially it's tying into the existing switching station at the plant that's left over from the retired coal generation facility. So leveraging that existing infrastructure. And then should we also build the Lake Julian battery storage facility, the two projects would actually share a single point of interconnection at that switching station.
So are there any transmission network upgrades necessary to accommodate this project?
Nothing that's needed outside of the fence of that point of interconnection facility, nothing on the outside of the system.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. LaRoche, my understanding is that this project could be eligible for certain tax benefits associated with recent federal legislation. Is that correct?
That is correct. We plan to qualify for so we plan to use the production tax credit instead of the investment tax credit. We plan to qualify for the base level plus the enhancements of meeting the prevailing wage in apprenticeship, as well as, since it's at a retired coal generating facility, there's an added benefit, 10% adder for that as well. That's unique to this site.
And it's in that the community, the energy community enhancement is on the PTC. Is that how that
It's
works?
on both.
Okay.
The investment tax credit is kind of like the legacy one. It's a one-time tax credit when it's placed into service. That's kind of like that 30%, right, baseline under the pre-IRA. Under the production tax credit, it's actually a tax credit you get for a 10-year period each year based on the production you produce each year. So it's $1 per kilowatt hour value.
Okay. Okay.
And then, yep, it's a higher rate due to being at a qualifying energy community site.
Understood. And have you all been able to quantify even approximately the tax benefits that this project would receive?
We have. It's roughly in the $350,000 range for that first year. And the PTC rate gets adjusted by inflation every single year, so it'll change, right? Actually, when the facility is built, and then over the 10 years, it'll change as well.
Okay, so it would not be appropriate to assume $3.5 million in savings, because what I'm hearing you say over 10 years, because what I'm hearing you say is the production tax credit will change over time.
Yeah, and that's just the year one value. So you can multiply it by 10, and then the PTC rate will actually increase over that 10-year period due to inflation that the Treasury sets. But as well, the solar facility will degrade over time, so it'll produce slightly less energy year over year. So it's a pretty good proxy, though, right, of what it'll be.
Okay, all right, thank you for that explanation. Have you all shared that approximation of the tax benefits with the public staff?
They have not in this proceeding. This project is included in the MYRP docket, and there were preliminary revenue requirements provided to public staff as part of that.
Okay. So my understanding is that this facility, this solar generating facility, would be constructed on, at least partially on a former coal ash deposition site. Is that correct?
Correct. So there's kind of three components of the site that it'll occupy. So we've got the actual standing facility where the coal generation unit used to be in the coal stacks that's being decommissioned. And then the actual coal ash basin itself. And then the third component is where we've moved the coal ash to on site at the landfill. And that's the smallest portion of it. It's roughly like 65 acres in total that the facility will occupy. About 11 acres, 10, 11 acres is actually on the landfill itself. The ash basin, the cleaned out ash basin, will be the largest footprint.
Okay. And about how many acres are on the cleaned out basin?
About 45 acres.
Okay. So the Woodfin facility is constructed on a closed county, domestic landfill, domestic waste landfill. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So at least a portion of this project would be constructed on landfill associated with the CCRs. Is that correct?
Correct. So similar characteristics with some differences. Yeah, it's not a municipal waste. It will be a lined capped landfill that we can't penetrate, similar to the Woodfin facility. Although the racking system we plan to use here is a little bit different. The turf material, the capping of the landfill, is actually designed to integrate solar too. So rather than being a ballasted system, it's actually more like it's like a carpet, and then it's got cleats to hold the racking facility in place. So part of the capping system for the landfill was chosen with this in mind.
Okay. So do I understand your testimony correctly then that the engineering for this Asheville facility will be different than the engineering for than the engineering for the Woodfin facility, specifically in the context of the landfills on over top of which you're locating?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. The facilities on both projects that are located on the landfills are different design, different equipment.
Okay. In reading the application, I did not see that this will be a tracking system. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's going to be fixed tilt, and that primarily has to do with the topography and just the lay of the land. It's not as well suited for a tracking facility.
Okay. If this were a tracking facility, would the output be different? Or would the capacity factor be different?
Yes, traditionally a a tracking facility will produce more energy, a higher net capacity factor. But that comes off of the trade-off. It's usually higher costs as well. You have more moving parts, so O&M looks a little bit different. So from a levelized cost of energy, would they be the same or probably pretty close still too? We did not analyze that out on this facility just due to the topography wasn't conducive.
Okay. We, one of the public staff takes issue with the cost of this facility, at least in my read of their testimony. And one of the things that we, the commission, have heard over the years is that, siting solar generating facilities in the western part of the state is more expensive than in the eastern part of the state, because in the eastern part of the state, you have land that's, there's abundant land and it's been cleared for farming or agricultural purposes. And you have relatively easy access, or at least you did a while ago, to the company's distribution and transmission systems. And that just isn't the case, or isn't as readily the case in the western part of the state. But here you've got a facility that's being located on, a site that's, you've got interconnection capabilities immediately adjacent to your solar generating facility. And the land has already been cleared and it's ready for you all to, develop with this solar generating facility. So why is the cost not more competitive with facilities that are built in the eastern part of the state?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Western Carolinas is traditionally not the focused development area as we see in the eastern part of the state. Perfect example of that, in the most recent RFP solicitation that we're currently running, there wasn't a single solar project cited in DEP West service territory.
Was that 2022?
Yeah, the 2022. Yeah, due to those challenges of topography, cost of land, availability of interconnection, and just the size that it takes. We're not going to see 80 megawatt facilities cited out there, primarily due to the topography challenges and then the site conditions. So yeah, this site we think offers a unique attributes of being cleared, having interconnection on site, and being company-owned land as well. So we're not paying an annual lease payment as well, as positive attributes.
So is there, in the costs associated with this facility, is there any value ascribed to, or any cost, let me say it differently, ascribed to the land or to the real estate?
So if we were leasing the land from a third-party landowner, the cost would have been higher because we would have been paying a lease payment. Right, Woodfin, I think, had a small minor payment to the city. So cost would have been higher, I think, to develop projects non-sited on Duke land. So I think why the costs are a little bit higher here are just due to the size of the project. There are no other 9.5 megawatts being cited in the Carolinas and being bid into the competitive RFPs. We have the benefit of the existing infrastructure on site, which helps lowers interconnection costs. If you were to connect a 9.5 megawatt project to a different transmission site, not on an existing switching yard, cost would probably be even higher. And then we should note that should we build the battery storage project, like Julian battery storage project, we'll be able to allocate and share those interconnection costs between the two projects, which would help lower the Asheville's proportion.
Okay. Let's talk about Lake Julian. Public staff witness Thomas's testimony indicates a planned or proposed in-service date for the Lake Julian battery around March 2025. Is that still the case?
So that's my understanding. I'm not responsible for that development and execution, but in close coordination with that team, we are evaluating options to bring our schedules together to leverage on the minimal synergies that we can monetize, such as one EPC contractor and then one Duke construction oversight group. That may be a little bit later COD from their side. We might have to pull ours forward a little bit, but we're still in early stages of being able to work through those items.
Okay, so what is the proposed in-service date for this Asheville facility?
So originally we were September of 2025, and then we agreed to adjust that to March of 26, and that's where it stands in the MYRP. That's what we changed in my rebuttal testimony. But we will continue to evaluate opportunities for cost savings. If we bring that forward a little bit to marry up with Lake Julian, then we'll certainly do so to help bring down costs.
Okay. Recognizing that you're not the team member that's the lead for the Lake Julian project, what can you tell me about Lake Julian? Specifically, I'm interested in whether it's been studied to export energy and what has been determined from those studies and sort of what you all know about its export capabilities.
Unfortunately, I have limited knowledge on that side. I only know that they've gone through the studies. They have an interconnection agreement. Since they were trying to interconnect before the solar facility was trying to interconnect, they had to get a provisional service to allow them to do that. That came with a very minor costs. Otherwise, yep, they've completed their interconnection study process as well.
Okay. So it's as proposed, it's a 17 megawatt, 4-hour battery. Is that correct?
Correct.
Would that be the largest standalone battery on DEP's system if it were placed into service?
I do not fully have a list of their projects. I know compared to what we've done in Western Carolina, I believe the answer is yes.
Yeah. And so are you aware of whether any network upgrades, so outside of the fence upgrades are made necessary by the Julian interconnection, Lake Julian interconnection?
Subject to check, as I haven't seen their interconnection agreement, but I believe my understanding is no, they didn't have any major network upgrades that were needed.
Okay. So public staff witness Thomas testifies regarding the sort of the DEP's load. And he makes the point, at least as I understand it, that there is some load growth anticipated in DEP West, and you all are experiencing increases in the peaks, both the summer and the winter. Did I understand do you understand his testimony the same way I do?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you agree with his testimony?
Largely correct.
Okay.
Well, let me take that back. I agree with those portions of it. Some of the cost comparisons, we provided some separate facts, but yes.
I understand. My question was just limited
Yeah.
to his testimony on what's happening with the peaks. Mr. Thomas also testified regarding let's see, what did he call it? A transmission, reservation of transmission capacity. I get my notes up.
It might have been in reference to the replacement generation.
No, it's point to point.
Yeah.
Let me see. Hang on one second. Yes, a transmission service request for 100 megawatts of firm point-to-point service from DEP East to DEP West. Do you remember this testimony?
What page are you referencing? Yeah.
I will tell you. Hang on, let's see. It's page 19 of his testimony down there, down at the bottom.
Yep, I see it. No, I'm not intimately familiar with that that study. As that'd be some more of the transmission group, but I think the point is that, yeah, we need more energy to serve the load in DEP West. That's not coming from DEP West.
Okay. When, based on what you understand about the DEP West load and load characteristics, when does the company need more energy?
Can you clarify like time of day or?
Time of day, time of year?
Unfortunately, that is outside my area of expertise.
Okay. But but you do understand that the summer and the winter peaks are growing?
Correct.
Okay. So is it a fair assumption to make that the company is going to need more energy at summer peak and winter peak?
Correct. And that, yeah, I think that aligns with our forecasts.
Okay. Could, like, let's say the Lake Julian battery goes into service, and its export capabilities are such that it could export what the solar generating its exports could match that of the solar generating facility. Is that even a possibility that the battery's export capabilities could match that of the solar generation?
Yes, and the battery is actually is larger than the solar facility. So yes, in theory, we could be charging that battery directly.
Okay. And the battery could charge from the grid?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Anything else that you want to tell us or explain about lessons that the company can learn from developing this Asheville facility, given that it's proposed to be located at the site of a former generating facility?
Yeah, we've cited other solar facilities at existing generation facilities and some substation properties in the Carolinas as well in Florida. So we're well with the parameters that you're now working on an existing generation site. So those are all built into the plans. Otherwise, it's nothing really special with it. We routinely build solar facilities and we add this into the portfolio to execute.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Lurch. That's all from me. Let me see if there are questions from other commissioners. Commissioner Duffley, you do have one.
Good afternoon. I'm going to follow up first with your discussion with Chair Mitchell regarding future energy needs. And are you familiar with the progress reports that are filed in docket E-2 sub 1089?
Are those the annual Western Carolinas modernization reports? Yes, I have seen those.
So could you talk to me a little bit on the second page of the report that was filed on March 24th of 2023? The first section talks about community engagement for demand side management and energy efficiency. And in that first paragraph, it talks about the company has successfully pushed the contingent CT out beyond the mid 2030s, in part through its community collaboration in Buncombe County. And that you've worked with the county about reducing peak load through demand side management, energy efficiency, and other measures. Could you just talk a little bit about that process and talk a little bit about what the company's doing with the community with respect to demand side management, energy efficiency, and other measures?
I would love to. Unfortunately, that is not my scope of responsibility.
Okay.
Other than guarding the community support for the solar facility, the demand side management and EE measures are not my responsibility.
Okay, fair enough. And then moving to your testimony, in your rebuttal, you indicated that the public staff made an inappropriate comparison with respect to the cost, comparing the cost of the Asheville project with Eastern North Carolina projects. And you stated that the proper comparison would be to compare the project with Western Carolina projects, solar projects. So has anyone actually done that comparison?
So you're right. I think it was a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison. And to my knowledge, the only other solar facilities being built in Western Carolinas that are somewhat apples to apples are our other Western Carolinas modernization project solar projects. So I did compare it back to Woodfin, and from an LCOE perspective, we're pretty darn close to where that one was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no other comparison that it would be outside of,
I looked at the database that
Mhm.
Jeff used, and the way you can filter the data didn't kind of drilled into that relevant project size or geographic reason
Okay.
or region. Yeah, I couldn't find a good comparison.
in your discussion with Chair Mitchell, I heard the main reason why the cost is so high, even with all of the benefits, really is the size of the project. Is that accurate?
Correct. There's still a certain level of fixed costs that go into developing a project. So if you spread that out over 9.5 versus 80, right, it's going to be higher on a smaller project. Interconnection being one of those big ones as well. From a dollar per kW standpoint, a smaller project's going to have a higher relative interconnection cost compared to an 80 megawatt facility. Rest assured, though, that the other components that we can control will be competitively procured. Our modules, our EPC costs. We certainly will leverage this facility as part of our broader portfolio of projects that we're building to drive these costs down as low as we can for customers.
Okay. And then there was discussion about the merger between DEC and DEP. Could you, and you may not be the proper person for this, but what are the estimated wheeling charges, annual wheeling charges to wheel power from DEP West or DEP East into DEP West?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do not have those cost numbers, and it's outside my purview.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Did you have any? Commissioner Hughes? And then,
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the carbon emission characteristics of this as an energy source. If I understand and read the testimony, a lot of the discussion about energy need was not necessarily a low carbon energy need, but there's some general kind of allusions to we need low carbon. But at the end of the day, there was also an analysis of just what is the energy needs in this region. I want to get back to the low carbon energy needs here. And I kind of wish the county was here because some of these questions are probably more for Buncombe County. But Buncombe County, as part of their support for this project, have highlighted their ambitious carbon reduction goals, which, if I'm understanding it correctly, is more ambitious and more accelerated than HB 951 and the carbon plan. So you have a situation where there's at least county government and maybe the city government that have a need for low carbon energy faster than normal, and this is going to play well to that. My question is from an accounting standpoint. As far as Duke is concerned, this is going to go into the grid and into your general energy mix. So when it gets to the county, are they going to be able to say that this project alone meets their accelerated carbon reduction goals, or are they going to have to essentially share the output, even though it's close to them, share the output with all of DEP West or all of DEP? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 points there. One, the other main reason why we're proposing the project is to satisfy the commitment in the Western Carolinas Modernization Program to site 15 megawatts in the DEP West region, specifically in Asheville or on the Asheville plant, which recognized it, and that was a part of a huge modernization of that site to retire coal and replace it with new technology and carbon-free resources, being the renewables aspect of that. So that helps the city in their more aggressive targets. You're absolutely right. They can't take credit for every megawatt hour coming out of this facility. But it does help DEP's generation portfolio, which then serves the county and the city. So by supporting that, it still supports their proportion, right? That serves their needs. You're exactly right. They're still going above and beyond, though, with other resources and measures to meet their goals. So I think it's just one piece of it.
Thank you for that. So it's become fairly common for organizations that have more aggressive goals to both rely on what's coming from the electric provider and their general mix, but also to take other initiatives. And I just can't help but wonder, with the county and the city being so interested in carbon-free so quickly, if there's some role that they could be playing in projects like this. I mean, I think one of the issues of public staff, if I can see, would be that the cost for all of the DEP customers is maybe higher compared to the cost of other sources. But I think the county and the city have gone on record saying for them, they want a very specific type of energy and they want green energy, so or carbon-free energy. So I just has Duke explored, and how would it even work for you to have an arrangement with either the county or the city, or in the future just someone else, where you could allocate all of the greenness, all of the low carbon from this facility to them? I just did a kind of back of the envelope calculation. I think what the county needs is very similar to the output of this facility, if they got all of it. But you're saying that they only get a very small percentage of it. And I'd be curious, is that percentage like 3%, 2%? I mean, how much are they going to be able to say? But so they continue to be very aggressive about a goal that they really want to meet. This is a facility that's close by. I'm just really curious whether, you could sell the RECs, if that's even possible under our framework. If there's been any discussions. I know Woodfin's a little bit different because they own the land, and I think they were able to keep the RECs as part of that arrangement. But with this, like you said, they don't seem to have any special claim to the low carbon.
That is correct. I mean, we do offer REC purchasing programs as a company, but they're not specific to a facility. So as of today, we don't have an approved program, a community solar program or a green source advantage program that rides on utility-owned assets. But it's my understanding that it's part of the pipeline of products that we're currently working on. So something that we can offer to governments and cities in the future.
Okay, so for this project, there's no options other than it just going into the general mix.
Not today, exactly. Yep, they'll get their proportion like any other DEP customer would that's served by this facility. Yep, as of options today.
Okay, helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Brown Bland.
So just generally, and I apologize if this causes you to retread all ground here, but in your testimony, you indicated that what you're trying to do is address the dearth of renewable energy sources in the Western region, and that the people who live in the Western region don't want to be left out of the transition and this change to renewable. They want to participate. They want to be part. And generally, I think that they wanted to have a role in lessening the company's reliance on fossil, and certainly reliance on fossil in their area. But given what we have learned since 2016, when the first order went out that was related to this, just given what we know now, is that could their concerns, or do you think their concerns, from what you know, would be are capable of being addressed by these other methods, such as shifting power from east to west? Would that that in itself mean that they're not left out of the transition, and also they would be using more energy from more renewable sources?
Yeah, so I think one of the big aspects of the Western Carolinas modernization project was the locational aspect of the generation being sited in DEP West in Asheville, as opposed to Wheeled in. And in terms of the cost, the 22 RP is still ongoing, right? Bidders were just notified on Friday for final bidders, so that information is not out available of those costs. But from what I've seen, I don't think the cost is exorbitant compared to what we're procuring in DEP East. And
You-
certainly on par with even projects we're seeing in DEC.
From the company's point of view, and I assume the company is mostly neutral about this decision in terms of being able to serve customers, but is there a company point of view where it is important that there be a renewable source such as this in the region, physically in the region?
Certainly, we think, right, there's a strong pull from the community and desire to fulfill the needs and expectations set in 2016. It still is a good site, certainly compared to alternatives. And then given that it's a really neat, right, transition of the site itself, going from a brownfield coal facility that's going to take advantage of an IRA tax benefit enhancement, right? Those are just certainly limited number of sites in the Carolinas. So we're excited to see this transition at this site. It's already progressed a lot from the coal facility. This is just the added cherries on top. So, yeah.
Same answer, does your answer change any when you're just looking from a, pure energy service perspective?
As the discussion before, we think, right, the energy needs and capacity is there. Granted, 9.5 megawatts isn't going to serve, right? It's not going to solve the problem in itself, but every little bit certainly helps.
And there's a reason, I guess, maybe you answered me, but let me ask again. There's a reason that the company thinks it's important to have a facility like this located in the West.
So we seek to fulfill the commitments set out previously to us, and we think this is a great site to meet that.
Thank you.
Commissioner McKissick, then Commissioner Kimmerer.
Just one or two questions and follow up to what Commissioner Brown-Bland was asking. I mean, in terms of the Western Carolinas modernization plan, I mean, do you feel that DEP has an obligation to move this particular project forward at this time? I mean, an actual obligation as opposed to it being perhaps aspirational. And I distinguish the two.
Sure. Yeah, I think the charges are clear in the Western Carolinas modernization program of what should happen in the transition in the DEP West region. And we seek to, it's taken us long enough to get to this point today, and we would like to execute on it and continue to progress on our energy transition.
And I guess what I'm trying to distinguish is whether you feel that is an actual obligation as opposed to something that's aspirational. I mean, it wasn't a requirement to move forward with this particular project at this point in time or at any other point in time.
I believe the order had said as reasonably as possible, right? You shall seek CPCNs for 15 megawatts, right? The first two projects happened a little bit faster than this one. This one is delayed a little bit timing wise, just due to the site work that needs to happen with decommissioning the coal facility and the cleaning out of the ash basin. Otherwise, we would have pursued it faster.
Do you believe there are any type of lessons or that Duke can learn from moving forward with this project at this particular site? I mean, previously, if we go back and we look at hot springs and things like that, I mean, you could theoretically look at it more as a pilot, whereas here, I'm trying to determine if you feel that there's something unique about the aspects of siting this particular project on this site that make it something that we can learn from or Duke can learn from.
Probably minimal, I think, learnings other than something you learn with executing any solar facility. There's no unique solution to be engineered. I mean, I guess it would be a first of its kind of the racking system on the landfill. Otherwise, it's a fixed tilt racking facility that isn't our first time building. And we certainly apply our lessons learned from prior projects to this from a contracting standpoint, from a equipment selection standpoint, right, execution. But otherwise, I think that it's a great site within the region to site solar, given that we own it, given the infrastructure existing on site for transmission, the ability to zone, right, and get a project permitted in DEP West that doesn't impact residential neighbors is a big benefit. We just got the county to issue the permit last week on that.
And And when it comes to the actual construction cost of actually, moving this project forward, getting it built, looking at the cost of power later, I mean, I gather that the cost of this project, notwithstanding the location, is substantially higher than what it would be, let's say, if you built it in DEP Eastern Territory rather than the West.
Correct. I think that's attributes are primarily where it's cited, just the cost to build in DEP West, and then its relative size. Again, it's going to be a very similar fixed interconnection costs. You're going to connect any project to the transmission system for no less than $4 or $5 million. We have to build a brand new tap station. And if you spread that over a larger project, right, the dollar per, it's going to be more economic compared to a smaller project. It is not $4 to $5 million interconnection here. It's, I think, 1.7, if I'm correct. But it's relatively a small project. So you're spreading those costs over fewer megawatt hours.
Got it. And in terms of, you got a site that's relatively level. There'll have to be some site work done, but it's already clear. So what's driving the cost to be so much higher in terms of, and maybe I misread something, but it looks like the actual cost of building that infrastructure, putting it in place, putting it in position is actually uniquely higher for this particular site.
Yeah, so you definitely get not as well economies of scale, right? When you go to get an EPC contractor, the price to build, a 10 megawatt versus an 80 is not going to be the same dollar per watt, just based on pure buying power, economies of scale, mobilization costs, right? Back office costs. The cost of engineering, it still takes about the same time and resources to engineer a 10 megawatt facility as it does an 80 megawatt facility. And then the other big driver is, again, just that interconnection costs. When you look at it from a pure dollar per watt or kW standpoint, a smaller project tying into transmission is going to have a higher relative dollar per kW comparison.
And let me ask you, if it were not for the Western Carolina modernization plan, would DEP be proposing to build this project in this location at this time?
Great question. And likely we would not be proposing it. Absent the Western Carolinas modernization project requirement and commitment, solar is being procured competitively through our annual competitive procurement process. And we've established a 20 megawatt minimum project size in that. So for that standpoint, the site wouldn't be big enough. We'd have to try to expand it, but there's geographic limitations for that. So it's unlikely that this site would be able to be competitively developed and bid and procured into a different resource.
Or not for the plan, modernization plan. And what do you think DEP would be doing otherwise? Were it not for the plan that, as you articulated, establishes certain goals, as I will put it.
Yeah. So outside my purview a little bit in system planning, but right, load is going up. We need resources, and it's coming in from DEP East. I can't speak to what other generation is being cited in DEP West though to meet that customer load.
And when you speak about load increasing, are you thinking like the winter peaks or generally load increasing?
I think it's both, right? I think peak is going up as well as annual energy consumption in the area.
And help explain to me how this would help winter peak.
It's minimal winter peak due to the production profile, right, and capacity factor ascribed to solar. But from an annual energy standpoint, it certainly helps with those needs.
Thank you, sir.
And then certainly the battery storage facility helps with that as well, as being 17 megawatts of firm dispatchable. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It helps provide some insight.
All right, Commissioner Kimright.
Good afternoon. I just have a couple of follow-up questions for you. The first is just to clarify the record or make sure that the record is complete. DEP has provided quite a bit of information about position about the need for the facility, but to complete the record, can you talk about the public convenience for this facility as well, so that we can have that as part of the record?
Can you elaborate on that for me? If what you're looking to
y-
address?
Yeah, the second prong of the public convenience and necessity, showing that this project is in the public interest. Just elaborate on how allowing this project to be constructed and operated would be in the public interest.
Sure, I think that can be demonstrated through a couple of ways. One, through the multitude of letters of support that were entered into the record. I believe we had 6 or 7 or so, consistent with the ones in previous Western Carolina's modernization project efforts, as well as a lack of opposition from the community. We had our hearing with the county just last week with adjacent property owners notified, and nobody from the public came to oppose or support in that docket as well.
Okay. And then just to follow up about public staff's position about alternative locations or sites for a facility to provide a solar facility in the region. I believe on pages 4 and 5 of your rebuttal, you touch on this a little bit more, and you discuss challenges in regard to, and I'm just paraphrasing, topography, and then a few parcels of sufficient size for a solar facility. And I think the public staff's position would be is if DEP had been able to locate a larger parcel, there could be a greater economy of scale so that the cost would be lower. And you talked about the limitations of those types of parcels. Did DEP actually do any site acquisition to try to determine whether there were parcels in the region that would be of sufficient size so that it could be more cost effective?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe this was gone through in a little bit greater detail in the Woodfin CPCN docket and discovery process where we did provide the list of parcels that were identified and targeted through that siting of the initial 15 megawatts, and rationale given for each one as to why they didn't pan out. Several of them were rooftop systems that either didn't have landowner interest or had its own technology and siting challenges. For the ones that were ground mount systems, they were either, too small or topography challenged sites, and or the prices that the landowners wanted were above market and further not in the best interest of customers. That's why we then came with the Asheville site as the third one to wrap up the 15 megawatts, which takes all that kind of off the table too, since we own the facility or own the property.
Okay. Thank you. And then my last question goes to public staff's testimony, I believe, on page 10, and this relates to the need for the facility in DEP West, and the public staff states at the bottom of page 10, it says the public staff is concerned about the high cost of the facility. In addition, power flows into DEP West have steeply declined since the Asheville CC plant came online, particularly during daytime hours when solar in DEP East is overproducing and must be exported or curtailed. Can you just respond to that statement? Because your testimony before, I believe, was that additional generation resources were in fact needed in DEP West.
Correct. And I'm not the load forecast guy, but I think when we look at the data supplied to public staff, there is a small short-term dip. But over time, it actually goes back up and exceeds where it was originally when the coal plant was retired. So short term, right, that is all yes, but in the longer term, it's actually rebounding up in the other direction, meaning that we need more resources to feed DEP West.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Let's take questions on commissioners' questions, and we'll start with you, Ms. Keyworth.
Public staff has no questions.
Okay. Company?
No questions, Chair. Thank you.
All right. All right, Mr. LaRoche, you may step down and be excused. Thank you very much for your testimony today.
Thank you.
All right. And you may call your witness.
The public staff will call Jeff Thomas to the stand.
Good afternoon, Mr. Thomas.
Good afternoon.
All right, raise your right hand, please, sir. Left hand, Bible. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right. Mr. Thomas, we will go ahead and get started with questions from commissioners since we've already admitted your testimony into the record.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, I will kick us off. All right, Mr. Thomas, you've heard, I want to ask you a number of the questions that I asked Mr. LaRoche. But I want to start with the 100 megawatts point-to-point transmission service.
Yes.
Can you just help me understand exactly what that transaction looks like? Is that a time-limited transaction?
Yes, it was an informational filing here. I'm not entirely sure it's been filed in a docket here, but it is informational. This is a FERC request that they make. But yes, those typically have some time frame on them, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head the time horizon. I believe it starts in 2024, but I don't know when it would end.
So what it's understanding that you don't know the specific time horizon, is it a reasonable assumption to make that it spans years?
Yes.
Okay. And how are those types of so to the extent that DEP incurs cost. Let me see how to ask my question. Help me understand sort of the way that costs are incurred and then recovered in that context, because it's a DEP to DEP transaction.
So I believe that the request is, because it's going from DP East to DP West, is essentially reserving the transmission rights through DEC.
Okay.
And then, we've heard testimony that DEP essentially operates their east and west as a combined system. And but if there are needs to move power from east to west, they would have to wheel that generally through DP, or I'm sorry, Duke Energy Carolinas. As far as the cost of that, or the cost recovery of those wheeling charges, I think they'd be treated similarly to any wheeling charges. And subject to check, I believe any revenue, if there was wheeling charges paid to DC, would benefit DC customers.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up for me. Do you know what need is driving this request?
So they said in the docket that it was looking for just to provide access, to provide capacity when the demand exceeded the availability of resources in that region, or if there's a generator outage. But nothing really beyond that was in that filing.
Okay. All right, thank you. Did you, you've testified, I believe you've testified that this project, the Asheville Solar Project, would be eligible for certain tax benefits associated with recent federal legislation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you hear Mr. LaRoche's testimony this afternoon on that issue?
Yes.
Do you agree with his sort of approximation of at least the annual tax benefit that might accrue to this project?
I think that's about right. I tried to go back and look at the numbers, but the specific total amount I think was confidential. But I think the production tax credit starts at north of $30 a megawatt hour, and then that escalates, and that goes for 10 years. But there's also assumption that some of the production tax credit may be transferred and not be totally claimed by Duke. So there may be losses associated with transferring a tax credit.
Can you help me understand what you mean by transferred?
So essentially, you can sell the rights to your tax credit to an entity that has the ability to realize that tax credit faster than Duke Energy may. They may have limits on the amount they can claim in any year because of their tax liability. And so my understanding is, and some of this is coming from discussions we've had in their ongoing multi-year rate plan, but there may emerge or is emerging a market to allow for the transfer of production tax credits and investment tax credits, and to facilitate kind of that movement of those tax credits a little bit faster to certain ratepayers.
Does that amount to tax? Is that like a tax equity finance? I mean, are they getting cash for a tax credit?
So
who's explaining?
We're quickly getting out over my skis here on tax stuff, but I think that's essentially how it is it's a tax payment, yes.
It's
a
cash
payment for the tax credit, which is then transferred. But like I said, I think
okay.
A little out of my skis, but I believe that's a general
Understood.
concept.
I understand. Okay. Can you tell me everything you know about Lake Julian Battery Energy Storage System?
Sure. Yep. So it's located on the same site as the coal sites, right next to the yard, the switch yard. I think it's about 17 megawatts, and I want to say it is a 17 megawatt 4-hour battery. So it's providing quite a bit, and we did agree in our stipulation with DEP in the rate case to include that for recovery in the multi-year rate plan. So that would be coming online, I believe, as Mr. Witness LaRoche said, in March 2025, or in March 2025, I think, or in early 2025. It was shifted a little bit in the update, but it would be coming online a little bit before the solar facility.
All right, in the multi-year rate plan docket, the rate case docket, you provided testimony regarding export limitations for certain of facilities in DEP service area.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that same concern for Lake Julian?
I do not at this time. I found nothing in my multi-year rate plan investigation to indicate that the Lake Julian battery would be throttled or limited in any way.
Did you look for that?
Yes, and it is connected through its own inverter and its own interconnection request. So to my understanding is that theoretically both the solar and the battery could output their full capacity to the grid at any given time. And, I'll just kind of note that the location of the battery, even though it wasn't specifically mentioned in the CPCN application, was a large part of our consideration for how this facility combined with the battery would be able to meet load, say in the early morning winter peak, which is where DEP West is seeing the fastest load growth.
Okay, but explain that, because so you're saying only, explain what you mean there, because I'm not sure I understand the testimony you just provided from the stand relative to testimony you provided in the pre-filing.
Sure. So I think it was just, I'm just saying it was part of our review was to look for that battery, finding that battery in the multi-area plan and then tying that to the CPCN application, kind of considered it as capable of that battery would facilitate behavior of that solar facility that would maybe not something we can see with, say, the Woodfin solar, which is standalone solar that is not tied to a battery.
So does that inform your opinion as to the battery system or to the solar facility?
I think when I testified to the difficulty that the solar facility alone would have in meeting the winter peak and how DP's winter peak is growing fastest, I think that was one consideration we made was, this energy that's coming out may be able to be used to interact with that battery in a way that could benefit ratepayers.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. So there's been some discussion today and in pre-filed testimony about the system needs, DEP West system needs.
Mhm.
Both sort of a longer term need for energy and then the peakiness or the increasing peaks, both the summer and the winter that DEP West is experiencing. I guess I'm still not clear. Does DEP West actually need energy?
So on an annualized basis, they do. And I think I just flip to the chart I think I put on page 20 of my testimony. So since the Asheville combined cycle came online, these the net imports, the percent of load met from imports have fallen significantly.
And so are you looking at that table on page 20 of your testimony?
Yeah,
Or that
the chart.
figure.
Mhm. Hopefully I have it in color, otherwise it might be confusing. And so we found that in certain months, relative to others, the amount of imports drops. In some case, DEP West is actually exporting power. You can see kind of in that last section there, which I believe would be spring of 2023. DEP West was a net exporter throughout that monthly time period. But it all depends on the hourly basis. And some of the data that I have is confidential, so I don't want to get into it. I didn't put it in my testimony, the analysis of the hours, but there are hours, particularly in the certain times when they have the peak energy where they are importing quite a bit of their energy from.
So are those hours outside of peak times?
There are some. I'd have to go back and look, but I know that during peak, particularly winter morning peak, they are importing.
Okay. All right. So we've kind of beaten this horse a whole lot today, but the cost of this facility, I mean, this is a site that's already been cleared. Transmission is readily accessible. No, not, that doesn't take much work to interconnect this facility to the system at transmission. And yet it's still an expensive system relative to other solar generation we're seeing developed, or at least proposed to be developed in North Carolina. Do you agree? The way I understood Mr. LaRoche's testimony is that there are certain costs that are, he described them as fixed, that when you can, because this facility is small, or proposed facility is small, there are fewer megawatts or megawatt hours over which to spread costs. And so it reduces the cost effectiveness of the system. Do you agree? Do you hear his testimony or understand his testimony the same way I do?
Yes, and the Lawrence Berkeley report that I reviewed, I mean, those same trends showed they bucketize size, and the 5 to 20 megawatt bucket is generally the most expensive on a dollar per kW basis than larger projects.
Okay. Okay. Let me see. Let me just go through my notes and make sure I have nothing else for you. Mr. Thomas, what do you know about emphasis on DSM and EE and DEP West? I mean, your testimony says it's unclear it's unclear to what extent the need for the facility could be met or reduced through an increased emphasis on EE and DSM measures in the West, DEP West. And that's on page 19 of your testimony. Is there anything else you can say to us about DSM and EE in the West?
Yeah, so I did dig into this in my investigation. I tried to find out if there was any specific DSME programs that have been proposed in DEP West, or any incremental gains over the rest of DEP in terms of DSME. We didn't have a lot of that data. I went so far as to sit in on a Blue Horizons meeting, which is the group out there that's been working on these projects, to kind of understand what they're working on and kind of get a view of how they operate. So it's, we looked at the last WCMP update as well, where they, DEP essentially said, because of the EE and DSM and the other measures of the WCMP, we've deferred the need for certain generation, natural gas fired generation units in that area, and try to dig in and understand that a little bit better. But from my review, I did not see that there was a significant or measurable incremental increase in DSME in DP West compared to the rest of the DP region, or at least Duke did not have that data that could support that hypothesis.
All right. All right. All right. Last question for me. The public staff's recommendation, you've sort of given us two choices here: deny it or approve it conditionally. Is your denial recommendation, does that recommendation take into consideration any tax benefits that might flow to this project?
I think that, so I made that recommendation based upon the totality of the evidence that I'd seen. So that would include the tax benefits. And so it was really, taking into account not only this application by itself as a standalone application, but as it's a part of the WCMP, and looking at the commission's prior interpretation and review of WCMP related CPCNs, of which I've worked on two, testified on two of those. So just trying to better understand that, and making sure that the WCMP order and the expectation was passed, I believe, in 2016. Quite a bit has changed since then. So from the public staff's perspective, we just want to make sure that even with 589 and 951 and many of the changes to the energy landscape, that the WCMP was still something that that the commission wants to see completed, and even with this facility being most likely the last solar facility that would come through with the WCMP.
Okay. All right, this is really my last question for you. Since you mentioned the WCMP, the that commission order from 2015 or 16 or whatever it was mentions 15 megawatts of solar and 5 megawatts of storage. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how much storage is the Lake Julian?
17.
17 megawatts of storage?
Yes, and
Okay.
there's 2 other battery projects in the DEP's multi-year rate plan in DEP West. I think it's the Craggy is 30, and the Riverside, I think, is 4 or 5 megawatts.
Craggy is 30. And
Yes.
Craggy is the 26. In
Yes.
service, proposed in service date of 26.
Yeah, I believe it's 26. And then there's the Asheville Rock Hill battery, which was also recently completed in DEP's West Territory.
And Asheville Rock Hill is what, about 9 megawatts?
Yes,
Okay.
top of my head, yes.
All right. All right, Mr. Thomas, let me see if there are questions from other commissioners. Commissioner Brown Bland.
Yes, Mr. Thomas, is there any real benefit if, as a member of the public advocate staff, you could take your cost concerns out of it? Is there any real benefit that you can see to this proposed facility? Benefit to customers?
Putting aside for a second my costs, those concerns about cost.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that there is, right. We've heard a lot about the difficulties in siting solar, and I think even in Witness LaRoche's rebuttal, I think it's clear that solar projects in DEP East would be less expensive to procure, but there is challenges to siting and transmission upgrades, long-term projects over there that are a bit longer. So siting somewhere in DP West where there are not a lot of transmission upgrades is certainly a benefit in terms of timing and getting it connected. And then obviously, I think there is a push not only by Duke, but the Department of Energy and other organizations to look at old coal sites, retired coal sites, or retired coal ash basins to locate solar that potentially could use up land that's not needed for other purposes, other development, which could drive up the price. So I think there is a benefit there, and obviously the coal tax credits is a benefit. So certainly it's a small project, and we are concerned about the cost, but I can admit that there are other benefits there that can come from building on a coal site.
And the reclaiming or repurposing of this coal site area, do you see that as if you have an opinion, as an environmental benefit?
So I couldn't speak to what the environmental benefits of that is. I mean, it's a landfill, so much like the Woodfin solar, it's just going to be topping the landfill. But Duke does have other coal sites, but obviously the limitation even with other coal sites is what kind of replacement generation might be going there, because you can't replace a coal site, one for one, just by building solar panels on the land there. It's just too intensive. So I think there are plans, in the coming out of the carbon plan and other to locate, new gas or potentially new nuclear resources at old coal sites, which could limit the ability of Duke to cover the landfills with solar panels, but it could be an option and would need to be explored at that time.
And if this proposed facility just happened to be in the least cost option, would you favor it and find it beneficial?
Yeah, I think if this facility was coming in at a cost that was competitive with what we've been seeing out of the 2022 solar procurement in DEP East and DC, then yeah, I think we would probably have recommended approval given what's going on.
And last question, if the commission sees an obligation or sufficient value in having a facility like this in the region, would you think, if you consider that we're adding the 9.5 megawatts and we saw value in that, would this project be the least cost way to achieve that purpose?
If I could just restate that, if you're saying if the commission had found a need to, that the project need was satisfied solely by the virtue of it being located on the coal site, would this be the least cost option of achieving that? Did I restate that right?
Not necessarily that it be on the call site, but if we see that a facility such as this, if we thought either our previous orders created some commitment or obligation to have something in the area, in that region, or if we saw just value in having this amount of megawatts or some solar facility presence in the region area, if that was the restriction that we were working with, would under that parameter, would you view this as the least cost option way to do it?
That's a good question. I don't think that I've spent enough time kind of studying alternatives to where this site is to truly know if there's a less expensive option. I do know that in their WCMP application for the CPCN for the combined cycles in Asheville, DEP did make mention of either doing utility scale or utility scale solar, community solar, or even rooftop solar. So I mean, it's entirely possible that there's a cleverly designed solar rebate program out there that could put 9.5 megawatts of solar on rooftops with a combination of DP ratepayer money and private capital that could be more cost effective than this. I don't know. I think that's something that I would, that I think is certainly something that can be explored. We have a solar plus storage pilot that's being, that may answer some of those questions, but I couldn't say whether this facility in and of itself would be the most cost effective, given those parameters.
Given the recent developments and where the state is moving in regards to rooftop solar, are there challenges that make rooftop difficult in that area, in the mountain area or in the western region?
I don't believe so in terms of just citing it. And rooftop solar is obviously much more expensive than utility scale, but a combination of utility and private capital could always lower those costs for DP ratepayers. And I think that's the concern we have, right? I didn't come out and recommend that the CPCN be rejected. I think really my recommendation was kind of just coaching it in the context of the WCMP. If this was so that's clarify that.
All right, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Duffley.
So, it was cold comfort what you said about the Blue Horizons issue. So does historically, public staff has not been involved in these meetings of this Blue Horizons Council?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay. But do you know, what did you do in your investigation to figure out what the energy efficiency and demand side management programs that were being instituted? What I thought I heard you say is you did an investigation, but you couldn't really put your finger on how these items were pushing out that CT. Did I hear your testimony accurately?
Yeah,
Okay.
essentially, we've got a region that's growing. There's energy needs growing there, and there's the generation from the new facility and new equipment being sited. So what we tried to do really was just move, through discovery. We said to Duke, is there any, what can you show us in terms of the DSM&E that's being adopted by customers in DP West versus customers in DP East? And we were looking really for a differential there.
Okay.
And so what, DP came and said was essentially, well, we don't track it by that granular level. So we don't have that data to bring to you right now. And so that we also tried to look at some of the hourly load forecasts and EE impacts that were in the carbon plan to try to tease out a difference between DP East and West, but it proved to be impossible to kind of tease out any meaningful difference or increment. So we I think that we would like to see that because I don't know that if there was a need for several hundred megawatts of dispatchable natural gas, I don't know that that's being displaced by 9.5 megawatts of solar and a 17 megawatts of battery. And then there would have to be a significant amount of DSM&E there and a demonstrable measurement there to show us that. But the load forecasts have changed over time, and we've seen that load forecast for DEP West, even though it's growing faster than DEP, so it's all kind of come down. As I'm sure you've heard during many of the IRP hearings, is that load forecast sometimes have been overestimated, but things are changing now, and what was true then may not be true going forward.
Okay, thank you. And this Blue Horizons Council, are there minutes of this council? What type of, how is
Yeah,
it structured?
I believe there are minutes to the council online. It's open to the public, so I just joined and listened, and they were just debating. I think at that time they were debating Green Source Advantage and some other community efforts for weatherization or winterization. But yeah, if there are minutes, I think they'd be available on their website.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
And then with respect to the wheeling charges, did you hear my question to Mr. LaRoche about wheeling? Do you know what the average of yearly wheeling charges to go to wheel power from DEP East to DEP West?
So I don't know the exact amount. We tried to calculate it based upon some of the FERC, the open access transmission tariff, and I believe those numbers would have been public, but I think it was not an insignificant amount of money to move that power across DC. But I also want to make sure that I'm interpreting that right. So I think it was there, but we weren't confident enough in our estimation of what that fee would be to put it into testimony.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, but not insignificant.
Not insignificant.
Okay, thank you. And then with respect to the other question that I asked was the comparison. And Mr. LaRoche stated that, he compared it to the Woodfin Solar, but can you think of any other projects that were within that area that you could compare the cost of this project to a similarly situated project in DEP West?
So it's pretty tough. There aren't that many. I think even when we looked at this, we dived into that a little more, looking at PURPA facilities and the Woodfin proceeding, and there really aren't that many large utility scale facilities out there, right? I think Hot Springs, the solar portion, Woodfin, and Asheville, these are the largest components of solar out there. Now I can't speak to what might be initiatives that companies might be putting on the rooftop for, like net metered solar at commercial or industrial facilities that may be changing. I understand that the 1 megawatt cap is maybe lifted for some customers out there, depending on the multi-year rate plan determination. So we may see more of that in the future, but I couldn't give a good idea right now of what is out there.
And that includes maybe mountainous regions in DEC as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner McKissick.
Sure.
Let's go to Hughes first.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, that's fine.
Putting the modernization project aside, I'm just curious, how does the public staff view the situation when there's a subset of the using and consuming public that have gone on record that this is really important to them? Their elected officials, democratically elected officials, have said this is really important to them. How does public staff view that from a need standpoint?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think we're, and we expressed some of these concerns in the Woodfin docket, and that was slightly different, where that was built on Buncombe County land, and there was arrangement for them to obtain those RECs to meet their goals. But I think the Buncombe County government filed a letter of support for the project, and many did, right? They wanted to see more renewable energy, access to the cleaner energy sources, and certainly that's necessary. But I think Buncombe County also said something that was, caught our eyes, saying that they're describing their significant commitments, their goals, and then say, these aggressive goals require significant investment from a variety of stakeholders, including the utility. And I think that makes us nervous if there are local governments, if there are organizations that have very aggressive renewable energy goals, and they want those goals to be subsidized by DEP ratepayers entire. And I think there are avenues, certainly there are avenues for these companies. Buncombe County and the city of Asheville have signed a deal with a private third-party power producer, Pine Gate Renewables, to build and construct and purchase the output from a 35 megawatt solar project under the Green Source Advantage program. We've seen the city of Charlotte has a similar project ongoing, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Duke University. There are avenues, and there's currently debate going on about expanding that program, making kind of a new program. But certainly there are avenues there. That program, that PPA that Buncombe County is going to enter into, no cost associated with that project will be borne by North Carolina ratepayers above avoided costs. This project, if it is much like Woodfin, if it is being used to meet local government goals, I feel that there should be some skin in the game, as it were, to make sure that they're paying for their goal or contributing to that. And so we are a bit apprehensive when we see these types of projects where local government goals will be met by Duke Energy investments.
All right, Commissioner McKissick.
Let me begin where Commissioner Hughes ended. I mean, when I sit here and read what public staff has recommended, they basically say if the Western Carolinas, modernization plan is a plan that's essentially an official plan that's been adopted, and then what we should do is look at it and say if that's it, then it's dispositive in terms of what our decision might be as a commission as it relates to this project. On the other hand, you say that it looks as if, I guess in the public staff's opinion, it perhaps is not dispositive. So help me out with this to get me to understand where public staff sees and evaluates this project. And you say we could have, approve it with conditions, but I mean, as I recall, conditions were pretty straightforward, that DEP construct and operate facility in strict conformance with all applicable laws and regulations, including the provisions of all permits issued by the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. I would think they would do that anyway. I don't consider that a condition that has puts any skin in the game. They're required to do that as a matter of law. And then it says that the issuance of the CPCN does not constitute approval of the final cost associated with the construction of the facility for rate-making purposes, and the order is without prejudice to the right of any party to take issue with the rate-making treatment of the final cost in the future. Are there any other conditions that you would perhaps say ought to be imposed in light of your response to Commissioner Hughes' question? And likewise, where do you really stand in terms of this plan? I mean, do you think of it as a plan that's obligatory, or is it aspirational? And I tried to raise that question with Mr. LaRoche to make a distinction between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But help me with that. I know it's a bit of a compound question, but I'm trying to sort through these facts and details and weigh them appropriately.
Yeah, so I'll try to make sure I get through that and answer your question. If I don't, let me know.
Sure.
So I think the WCMP, as the commission noted in that order at that time, they're not, and then the subsequent orders, it was not they did not grant Duke a CPCN for 50 megawatts of solar and direct them to build and recover 5 megawatts of storage. It was a plan, an expectation that Duke would file the CPCNs. And as we know, any CPCN is then subject to the standard process of review that is unique to the CPCN process. So it's public staff's view that the WCMP sets an expectation and that we review the subsequent CPCNs with the same level of rigor that we review other CPCN applications. And I think in our Woodfin order, in our Woodfin testimony, I think we came and said, maybe based upon what had been filed and reviewed at that time up to that date, that we did not see the WCMP as controlling, and we were very concerned about the cost of that project and the potential subsidy for a local government, and that there were many concerns about that project. In this proceeding, I think we still apply the same level of review, and we understand that the Woodfin order was not precedential. But we also want to take into consideration the entirety of the WCMP and all the orders that have come related to that project when we make our determination here. And I think that's partly why we looked at this and said, essentially, right, that if the commission still believes that the WCM still believes that WCMP is controlling here and sets a firm and expectation to actually build this solar, kind of regardless of the costs that it may impose, then certainly we would support the approval. And if not, if the energy landscape has changed significantly enough, over the intervening years that maybe we need to look for other options, then we also provided a recommendation there. But we, taken as a whole, I think if we had reviewed this project on its own merits by itself without any WCMP, I would almost we would likely not support the building of the project. But taken as a whole, with the WCMP and the commission's prior directives and orders and the overall cost of the entire WCMP project that we looked at, we would support this project, and that's partially why we put it recommended it be included in the revenue requirement in the multi-year rate plan and our stipulation there.
And in terms of the conditions that were recommended, are there any further conditions that you could think of or would suggest or recommend? I mean, because they're pretty much required to comply with the law, regulations. So that seems to be that's something I assume that any applicant would conform to if we were to grant their request for CPCN.
Yeah, and admittedly, those are I think anytime we recommend approval of a CPCN, those are typically the conditions we put in there. I think we put a lot of conditions on the Hot Springs docket, and that was largely because of its status as a pilot program and the reporting requirements and the cost cap and a lot of other measures that we put in there. But at this time, I can't think of or necessarily recommend an additional condition there. I think the commission's well within its rights to put other types of recommendations in there, but at this time, I think I don't have another.
Nothing else that comes to mind. Because Hot Springs, it looks like you had, as I recall, about a dozen of them. And
yes, and that was largely, right, as I said, related to its status as a pilot project. For example, I know it's a different company, but in the DEC CPCN proceedings for Maiden Creek and Gaston Solar to facilities that procured through the competitive procurement of renewable energy program, I think our conditions were similar to what we recommend here. So typically for non-pilot type projects, I think I think we will certainly, as this project gets closed to plant and we investigate it in the next rate case, we will certainly look at the cost, how much do we exceed the cost estimate by, where those cost overruns, if any, came from, what factors influence the schedule, what lessons were learned by building it on the coal ash landfill, and how might this be parlayed into other generation facilities on coal sites in the future. We'll certainly dig into that. But at this time, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend any of those in the CPCN.
And to what extent was it evaluated what the options might be if they did not build this particular project or facility and, looked at doing something in DEP West territory? Whatever that might be, either Duke itself or perhaps entering into some type of PPA with, a private provider. How closely was that evaluated in terms of crunching what I will call projected numbers to assess those against what the cost of this project is projected to be at this time?
Right. So I think that, the thing about the Asheville solar facility was
Yeah.
that the WCMP application and order specifically said a solar facility at the Asheville plant. And then if you can't get 15 megawatts out of that, then you can go get other stuff. And so Woodfin, Hot Springs, those were that was the additional solar that, because Duke said they couldn't put 15 megawatts at the plant. So the WCMP has always had a clear expectation of a site at the Asheville plant. And so for that reason, I believe, DEP did not thoroughly evaluate alternative sites that it might have located solar in the region. I think a lot of that analysis was done. Some of that analysis was done for the Woodfin docket, where they looked at other potential sites. But the Asheville site at the coal plant with the unused land and the utility-owned land, and that was kind of an expectation that they would go there.
I understand. I mean, I guess I'm sitting here trying to evaluate the relative merits of this particular project and trying to really assess as objectively as possible, what's really in the best interest in terms of serving the entire DEP base, as well as respecting, what has been historically respected in terms of what I'll refer to as the aspirational targets of the modernization plan, and kind of sort this all through. So I appreciate your thoughts, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Right, Commissioner Kimmerer.
Good afternoon, Mr. Thomas.
afternoon.
Just two questions. The first is that you stated that less expensive options are available to the company from the Asheville facility. And for those less expensive options, did you consider the wheeling charges for solar DEP going through DEC territory? Is that part of your calculation in determining that there would be less expensive options?
So we looked at for example, the 2026 solar investment project that's being procured, and we looked at other projects that are being procured through that process. The delta in terms of the levelized cost of energy was so great that even our estimates of the wheeling charges would not have been enough to overcome that. So we did some kind of analysis trying to interpret make sure we're interpreting it correctly, but the difference was not. I mean, I don't want to talk the confidential numbers, but the spread was significant, and so that was not overcome by the wheeling.
Just my last question. Duke's commitment and the commission's order for the 15 megawatts of solar and the 5 megawatts of storage. I heard your testimony in regard to Chair Mitchell's questions that DEP, that there is significantly more storage that has been constructed and that is planned in DEP West. Do you have an opinion about whether this commitment and expectation could be met through the additional amount of storage that has been constructed and planned in the area? Or is it confined specifically to 15 megawatts of storage and 5 megawatts, 15 megawatts of solar and 5 megawatts of store, or can there be some accommodation due to the amount of storage in the area?
So I think I think the WCMP said, and subject to check, I think it said at least 5 megawatts of storage. And certainly I think DEP has already fulfilled that requirement, right? But there is still more solar coming down the pipeline. I will say, just to clarify, is that the DEP's multi-array plan does have more solar in DEP East, or more storage in DEP East, but there's still, a decent amount, about 50 some odd megawatts in DEP West. But I think that certainly the storage that they've built and the storage in the MRP would satisfy that. I think from the public staff's perspective, if the commission does approve this CPCN for the Asheville facility, you'll have more than 15 megawatts of solar and far more than 5 megawatts of storage. And I believe that would essentially complete the objectives of the WCMP, and we would probably not anticipate further CPCNs for solar in the region that rely solely on the WCMP, kind of, or rely on the WCMP as heavily as this one. But that would be, I think, the commission may make that determination if it's complete or closed, or we may have further discussions with the company on that.
Well, I don't want to belabor this, but I think I was trying to get at is because there's more storage than had been anticipated, is that offset the amount of solar?
Oh, I understand.
What's a public staff's position about that?
That's a good question. I think, ultimately, if you just put batteries out there, you're not actually getting any of that clean generation. And certainly you can store it up at night by running the combustion cycle a little more than you otherwise might. But I think that if not the letter, certainly the spirit of the WCMP, I don't know that it would be offset with that kind of trading, but yeah, it's a good question, but I'm not sure. Hopefully I've answered it sort of. Okay, thanks.
All right, Mr. Thomas, one last question before we let you go. Mr. LaRoche's rebuttal testimony revised the numbers for the 26 solar investment project, the LCOE. Did you see those numbers?
I did.
Number?
I do agree that was the update that they did provide with their supplemental. And I've dug into it a little bit. Some of the changes were, publicly the capacity and the dollar amount changed, but there were some other changes to the revenue requirement spreadsheet that still kind of looking at. But I will agree that they did provide that number. It went from between direct and supplemental. It went from an 82 megawatt project to an 80 megawatt project, and the cost went up a little bit as well.
All right, let's see if there are questions on the commissioner's part.
No questions.
No questions.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we've come to the end of.
One question for the commission. There was many references to the Woodfin order, and I know we're not supposed to take precedent. It's not supposed to take precedent, but it would be appropriate to mention that that order is E2 sub 1257 in case the commission wants to cite it in any previous orders.
The final order issued in E2
Thank you. That completes our case.
Yes, that completes the case. Thank you.
All right, with that, we will adjourn. Thank you very much.